Hi and welcome to our virtual Yellowstone tour. We're at the west entrance to Yellowstone National Park, which is the busiest of the 5 entrances to Yellowstone. Although this year, 2020, being the coronavirus year, nothing at all is busy. We see that there are 3 lanes of the 4 open at the moment, and normally we'd have to figure out, well, which lane do we want to go through? Which one's going to have the least waiting time. But here we don't have that problem today. We're just inside Yellowstone National Park, and when you come in for the first time, they'll give you one of these little brochures, and it really is very valuable because on the inside of it you'll see, apart from anything else, but a really useful map of the park. In addition, there's all sorts of other great information about the birds, about the animals, about the thermal features, and I do encourage you to take a look at that. So if you do have a look at the map, and I'm going to put a link up to show you an online version of the map on Yellowstone's National Park Service site, you'll see that we're entering the park at the west entrance, and we're making our way more or less due east to a place called Madison Junction. It may be useful to have a look at a map of Yellowstone during this video. Please go to yellowstonetours.net/map. Madison Junction is where we'll meet up with the so-called Grand Loop, the roads that describe a gigantic figure of 8 running through Yellowstone National Park. If you look at the map, you'll see that the park, as I say, is really huge, and we generally divide tours into a tour of the lower loop of the figure of 8 and a tour of the upper loop of the figure of 8. And this road from West Yellowstone to Madison Junction is probably the most traveled road in all of Yellowstone. The west entrance at West Yellowstone is what I like to call the main entrance to Yellowstone National Park. And there's more vehicles that come in the west entrance than any of the other entrances. So we're making our way more or less due east from West Yellowstone towards Madison Junction, and we'll be running into the lower loop, as I say, over there. And you'll notice we'll be running into the lower loop on the southwest side of the lower loop. If we turn right, as I'll point out a little further down the road, we would head down to Old Faithful and the main geyser basins. Turning left would lead us to Norris Geyser Basin, as well as towards the upper loop. Now, driving as we are at the moment, the trees that are all around us are called lodgepole pine trees. And the reason they were called lodgepole pine trees is that when the early settlers came to this part of the United States, they could see that the trees were really straight, and they could just cut them down and use the wood with a minimum of work to make their lodges, hence the name lodgepole pine trees. And we'll be talking a lot more about the lodgepole pine trees as we continue our way through these virtual tours of Yellowstone National Park. Now, Yellowstone is a huge park, and it falls in 3 states. We're currently in the state of Montana, but just, a couple of 100 yards up the road, we can see the Wyoming sign. And we're just about to enter Wyoming. 97% approximately of the park is in the state of Wyoming, 2% is in the state of Montana, and 1% is in Idaho. And the little town of West Yellowstone, which we've just left, is really close to where all 3 states meet up. As we continue our way heading east, just around this corner, very soon we're going to be seeing the first manifestations of the Great Fire of 1988. The Great Fire of 1988 was really a transformative event for Yellowstone National Park. It burned so much of the park, and if we have a look straight ahead of us, we can start to see some of the what are called snags coming into view. Now, a snag in this context is a standing dead tree. So we consider that the fire occurred in 1988. This year is 2020. These dead trees are still standing, and you can see a couple of them over there. And if we have a look around us, we can see how much the trees have grown, or for that matter, haven't grown in the years since the Great Fire of 1988. So these trees are approximately 32 years old. Unfortunately, if we have a look at the ends of the branches of some of these trees, you'll see that they are turning brown. And this, there we go, there's some good examples over there. And up ahead of us here as well. I'll get back to that in a moment. Off to our left through the trees, you can see the Madison River. Now, the Madison River is a partial thermal river. You guys have probably heard of the notion of thermal features. Well, Yellowstone has got 4 main thermal features. Everybody's probably heard of geysers. Old Faithful is the world's most famous geyser. The other 3 thermal features are hot springs, mud pots, and fumaroles. And during the course of these virtual tours, you will become acquainted with all 4 of the thermal features. Off to our left, unfortunately a little bit behind the trees at the moment, we can see the Gallatin Mountains on the other side of the Madison River. When we left Montana, when we left the town of West Yellowstone, we were in Gallatin County, and where you see the Gallatin Mountains over there, just on the other side, is a part of Yellowstone that is really separate from the main part of Yellowstone. You'll see it on the road from West Yellowstone to a town called Bozeman, which is in southwest Montana. But once again, we will get back to that in another one of these virtual tours. I was talking about the Madison River being a partial thermal river. The Madison River is formed by the confluence of the Gibbon River and the Firehole River. The Firehole River flows through Yellowstone's main geyser basin areas. And as it flows through, so water from these thermal features, from the geysers and the hot springs, gets deposited into the Firehole River, making it a thermal river. With all that hot water coming into it, you can imagine that the temperature of the water is a lot higher than a regular river. And with the Madison to our left being formed by both the Gibbon and the Firehole rivers, that is why we call the Madison a partial thermal river. And it's warm enough, certainly as it leaves Yellowstone, for it not to freeze over for most of the winter, and also for fishermen to be able to fish it throughout the year. Talking of fishing, remember that you do need a special fishing permit to fish in Yellowstone National Park. You can't use your Wyoming one or your Montana one. The fish that we find here, unfortunately at the moment, are for the most part invasive species. We get cutthroats, browns, rainbows, trout that is, and also graylings, and I'll get back to the fish in a moment. For many years through these trees over here, there was an eagle's nest. It came down in the spring last year. And I'm going to be jumping around an awful lot. If you have a look across the river, you can see the trees over there that have been burnt, and you may be wondering, well, did that take place in the Great Fire of 1988? We look at the size of the snags, we look at how many there are, and we look at the remaining trees, and the answer is no, and I'll have to get back to that in a moment as well. The eagle's nest was made in a snag right up over there. And the park has only just opened, and it looks like that snag has come down as well. So we certainly won't be seeing an eagle's nest in there. Anyway, so that fire that decimated those trees on the other side of the Madison River was not part of the Great Fire of 1988. It occurred, I can't remember, either 3 or 4 years ago. The years tend to flow into each other over here. And it was a really significant fire. And the authorities had to throw a lot of resources at it. Fortunately, we have what's called a smoke jump base at the West Yellowstone Airport, just a couple of miles down the road from Yellowstone National Park. In fact, there's a smoke jump exhibit in the town of West Yellowstone next to the giant screen theatre, what used to be called the IMAX theatre. And I encourage you to go take a look at both of those. Oh, can you see the side of the tree? Do you see over there on this tree as well? Can you notice how the bark has been rubbed away on the trees? Here we see it again. And when we see the bark being rubbed away from trees, oh, look at that. We get our spring wildflowers really late. This is the beginning of June when I'm doing this video. And because it's so cold here, and because the park is situated relatively high, our spring comes pretty late. At our motel, we do not put flowers in our flower pots outside until after June the 1st, because there's always a chance that the flowers are going to die because of the frost that we still get overnight, the temperatures dropping to freezing. This over here is the beautiful Madison Valley. Now, we will be stopping on various of the videos to show you more information about a lot of these features, and I will be coming back to the Madison Valley on another video, and we'll discuss it in a lot of detail. But if we have a look, you can see how the river, the Madison River, is all over the place. It zigs and zags its way back across the Madison Valley. If you also have a look on the other side of the Madison Valley, you can see that the trees there are very small, and they were burnt by the Great Fire of '88 as well. And when that happened, scientists who work for the National Park Service were really concerned, because there's a herd of elk that we see in the Madison Valley on a year-round basis. It's one of the few elk herds that does not migrate, and the reason it doesn't migrate is that it basically has everything it needs from this part of the Madison Valley heading to the east straight ahead of us until you get to Madison Junction. Number one, this part of Yellowstone is lower than other parts of the park. In addition, because of the amount of water in the Madison Valley, particularly in that area that we've just passed, the winter does not last as long. The snow does not last as long, because snow comes into contact with the water, and what happens? Well, it melts. Because the snow melts, the elk and also the buffalo are able, excuse me, somebody's just overtaking me. The elk and the buffalo are able to get access to their source of food a lot more readily here than they're able to elsewhere in the park. Now, just around the corner in fact not just around the corner, just up the road, is where we so often see elk. And I encourage you, when you get to this part of the park, to stop and take a look and see if you can see elk here, particularly in the fall when the elk are in rut, and we'll talk about what the rut is on one of the other videos. But it's a very popular place to come and see elk, and you'll really watch in amazement as one bull elk, the dominant bull elk, rounds up a harem of the female elks, of the cow elks, excuse me. We continue our way past an area where we see another fire. This was once again a more recent fire, still following the Madison River. Now, we note that we haven't seen any buffalo yet, even though I pointed out to you where the trees had been scraped away. There we go again, where the bark of the trees had turned white. And what that is the buffalo at the end of the winter and the beginning of the spring like to rub up against the trees, and by so doing they get rid of their more thick winter coat, which has helped to protect them through the winters. And our winters here are really, really brutal. In the little town of West Yellowstone, if I could just show you this. So this is Mount Haines. That's Mount Haines up over there. And once again, we'll take a look at Mount Haines in a lot more detail. But Haines is a very interesting name. His name was J. Frank Haines, and he acquired the first photographic concession in Yellowstone National Park. And I encourage you to go on eBay and search for some of his earlier photographs. You can find them going at prices that really are not that bad. And when he shot the pictures, they were either black and white or they were sepia tone, in other words, shades of brown. But they've been hand colored, and they are really absolutely exquisite. We've got quite a few of them in our motel in West Yellowstone, and you can buy them in book form, you can buy them in little folders, and they really are precious. I encourage you to take a look, and then perhaps even bring them with you and look at how his photographs of Old Faithful compare to the pictures that you take. Look at his depiction of Golden Gate. Golden Gate is one of my favorites, and we'll talk about that in one of the other videos. But have a look at that and see how that compares to the way that it is today. Now, I was talking about buffalo and how we're not seeing them at the moment. Buffalo, when you look at them, look like they're pretty dumb. They're these big, heavy-set animals. I think that they're amazing. They really are delightful. But there's two areas that they're not that dumb. Number one, have you heard of the famous buffalo jams that we get here in Yellowstone National Park? They are legendary. And once again, I'll come back to that story. If we have a look at these mountains, these small mountains that are ahead of us as we approach the Madison Junction area, these have quite a lot of significance. I haven't talked about the caldera yet. The caldera was the huge hole in the ground that was left when the Yellowstone supervolcano last erupted hundreds of thousands of years ago. This here is the edge of the caldera, and it also constitutes cliffs that have been formed by lava flow at various times over the years. But once again, we'll get back to that in another one of those of our videos. To get back to the buffalo, you've heard of the buffalo jams that we have here in Yellowstone National Park, perhaps. If you haven't, you're almost certain to run into one. What happens is The buffalo know that it's a lot easier to walk on the smooth paved road than it is to walk through those forests over there. So you'll see them on the road and your car is just stuck behind them. And people don't want to knock over a buffalo, they don't want to hit a buffalo, and I'll talk to you a little bit later about the best way to deal with those situations. So you get these massive traffic jams forming, and when I say massive traffic jams, boy, you can be delayed for well over an hour coming out of the park. In fact, we had a group on one of our tours who we had on a flight back, and our guide was delayed so long that they missed their flight back, and we had to drive them to Salt Lake. This over here, by the way, is the Madison campground. This is the largest campground in Yellowstone. Unfortunately, with the coronavirus, it is currently closed. Now, the other way that buffalo are not as dumb as they look is that they instinctively and intuitively know that the higher parts of Yellowstone will be cooler in the summer and the lower parts will be warmer in the winter. So at the end of the spring, beginning of the summer, you'll start to see them migrating up to the higher parts of Yellowstone. And as I mentioned to you before, we're in a lower part of Yellowstone National Park. So this is why we haven't seen any buffalo here, but just 2 weeks ago there would have been hundreds of them. And just when I was last in the park a few days ago, I saw a handful, which unfortunately we haven't seen now. This is the entrance to the Madison campground, and unfortunately there's plastic all over it, so it is closed. And as we look down over there, we see that it is closed. We're coming to Madison Junction, and I'm going to pull off over here just for a moment. And this is where I'm going to end this video. This video included the section of road between Madison Junction, which is where we are now, and West Yellowstone, where we started. If we were to turn left, as we'll do on a subsequent video, we would make our way up towards Norris Geyser Basin and the upper loop, and if we were to turn right, we'd head off down to Old Faithful and the geyser basins. Thanks for joining me on this video. Thanks for taking the virtual guided tour, and I'll see you in Yellowstone.